December 1944. The freezing forests of the Ardennes. Allied commanders are caught completely off guard as 200,000 German soldiers launch Hitler's last desperate gamble. Panic spreads through the command structure. Maps are redrawn. Orders are confused. Generals scramble to react. But one man isn't surprised at all. While others are still trying to understand what's happening, General George S. Patton, Jr. stands before Dwight D. Eisenhower and makes a promise that sounds absolutely insane. I can have 3 divisions moving toward Bastogne within 48 hours. The room falls silent. Military experts later called it impossible. Some called it reckless. But Patton wasn't bluffing. He had already planned for this exact scenario. Join me as I dive into the mind of General Patton and uncover what really prepared him for the Battle of the Bulge, and why he was the only Allied general truly ready for Hitler's final offensive. General George Smith Patton, Jr. remains one of the most controversial, celebrated, and studied military commanders in American history. He was brash, profane, and utterly convinced of his own destiny for greatness. His peers often found him insufferable. His superiors frequently wanted to relieve him of command. His soldiers, the men who actually fought under him, would follow him anywhere. But beyond the pearl-handled revolvers, the polished helmet, and the theatrical persona, there existed a military mind of exceptional capability. A man who studied warfare with the obsession of a scholar and practiced it with the aggression of a warrior. The Battle of the Bulge would become his defining moment. Not because he planned the overall Allied strategy, he didn't. Not because he commanded the largest force, he didn't do that either. Patton's greatness in the Bulge came from something far more fundamental. He was ready when no one else was. In a war defined by planning and logistics, by intelligence reports and careful coordination, Patton proved that preparation, intuition, and aggressive thinking could overcome even the most devastating surprise attack. This is the story of how one general saw what others missed, prepared for what others ignored, and acted when others hesitated. This is why Patton was the only general ready for the Battle of the Bulge. To understand Patton's achievement, we first need to understand the catastrophe that was unfolding around him. By December 1944, the Allied forces in Western Europe had grown comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. After the breakout from Normandy and the rapid advance across France, many believed the war would be over by Christmas. German resistance seemed to be crumbling. Hitler's Reich was being squeezed from both east and west. Victory felt inevitable. This confidence bred complacency. The Ardennes forest, a rugged, heavily wooded region spanning Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany, was considered a quiet sector. Allied commanders viewed it as a place to rest exhausted divisions and train new replacements. The thick forests and narrow roads seemed unsuitable for major military operations, especially armored warfare. This assessment ignored one crucial historical fact. The Germans had already proven the Ardennes could be conquered. In 1940, Hitler's panzer divisions had swept through these same forests to outflank the Maginot Line and defeat France in just 6 weeks. The Allies had forgotten. Hitler had not. In absolute secrecy, the German military assembled a massive strike force. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, would throw everything Hitler had left into one final offensive. The plan was audacious. Punch through the weak Allied lines in the Ardennes, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and split the British and American forces in 2. On the morning of December 16, 1944, the German attack began. Over 200,000 German soldiers, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns, struck the American lines. The defenders, many of them inexperienced troops or battered veterans sent to the Ardennes to recover, were overwhelmed. German forces advanced rapidly, creating a massive bulge in the Allied lines that gave the battle its name. The weather was brutal. Temperatures plunged well below freezing. Heavy snow and thick fog grounded Allied aircraft, neutralizing the air superiority that had become the backbone of American tactical doctrine. Without planes overhead, German tanks could move freely. Communication broke down across the front. Entire units were surrounded and destroyed. Others fled in panic. The town of Bastogne, a crucial crossroads, became surrounded by German forces, trapping the 101st Airborne Division and elements of other units in a desperate siege. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, shock gave way to confusion. Intelligence had failed catastrophically. German radio silence and careful concealment had hidden the attack preparations. Now, Allied commanders struggled to understand the scope of the disaster. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery wanted to pull back and establish defensive lines. Other generals advocated for measured responses, careful consolidation of forces. The dominant sentiment was caution. Determine the enemy's intentions before committing to action. In the chaos of those first days, no one seemed to have a clear plan. No one except George Patton. To understand why Patton was ready when others weren't, we need to examine the man himself, his philosophy, his methods, and his almost obsessive approach to military preparation. George Patton believed in what he called military intuition, but this wasn't some mystical gift. It was the product of relentless study and preparation. Patton read military history voraciously. He studied the campaigns of Alexander the Great, Napoleon Bonaparte, and the American Civil War generals. He analyzed German tactics from World War I and closely followed their innovations in World War II. Most importantly, Patton thought like his enemy. While other Allied commanders focused on their own offensive plans, Patton constantly asked himself, what would the Germans do? Where were they vulnerable? Where were we vulnerable? In the weeks before the Ardennes offensive, Patton's Third Army was positioned to the south, preparing for its own attack into the German Saar region. But Patton wasn't so focused on his own plans that he ignored the bigger picture. He noticed things that others dismissed. Intelligence reports mentioned increased German rail activity. Aerial reconnaissance, when weather permitted, showed unusual movements behind German lines. Prisoner interrogations revealed hints of something brewing. Individually, these signals were easy to dismiss. Together, they formed a pattern Patton recognized. On December 12, 1944, 4 days before the German attack, Patton confided to his staff that he believed the Germans were planning something big in the Ardennes. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, shared this assessment. While Schaef's intelligence section dismissed the possibility of a major German offensive, Koch and Patton trusted their own analysis. But Patton went further than mere prediction. He ordered his staff to begin planning contingencies. We'll be called upon to move north, he told them. I want 3 plans ready. His staff developed 3 separate operational plans for pivoting the Third Army away from its eastern offensive and wheeling north to counter a German attack. Each plan detailed troop movements, supply routes, and timing. The plans were kept ready, waiting for execution orders that Patton believed would inevitably come. This was not standard practice. Most generals focused entirely on their assigned missions. Planning for hypothetical scenarios outside their sector was considered unnecessary, even presumptuous. But Patton understood something fundamental about warfare. The enemy gets a vote. His preparations extended beyond paperwork. Patton ordered his divisions to maintain maximum readiness. Supply depots were positioned for flexibility. Communication lines were established that would facilitate rapid redeployment. His army was coiled like a spring, ready to move in any direction. Patton's leadership philosophy reinforced this readiness. He believed in pushing authority down to the lowest levels, training his subordinates to act decisively without waiting for orders. His division commanders knew his intent, understood his aggressive philosophy, and could begin preparations even before receiving
When the German
explicit
attack
instructions.
came
On December 16th, Patton's Third Army was already mentally prepared for rapid movement. Other units were shocked by the attack. Patton's men had been warned that something was coming. The difference between Patton and his fellow commanders wasn't courage or patriotism. All the Allied generals possessed those qualities. The difference was imagination. Patton could envision scenarios that others couldn't or wouldn't consider. He prepared for battles that hadn't been fought, against attacks that hadn't been launched. This imaginative preparation combined with aggressive action and meticulous logistics, would prove decisive in the desperate days ahead. December 19, 1944, the Verdun Conference. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, gathered his senior commanders to address the crisis in the Ardennes. The atmosphere was grim. The German penetration had reached nearly 50 miles deep in some sectors. Bastogne was surrounded. The initiative belonged entirely to the enemy. Eisenhower opened the meeting with words that would define the moment. The present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this conference table. Then he turned to practical matters. How could the Allies respond? What forces could be moved to stop the German advance and relieve the besieged garrison at Bastogne? General Patton spoke up. "I can attack with 3 divisions within 48 hours. The room fell silent. Staff officers exchanged skeptical glances. What Patton proposed seemed impossible, perhaps even reckless. His Third Army was engaged in active operations facing east toward the Saar. To pivot north toward the Bulge would require disengaging from combat, turning an entire army 90 degrees and advancing over winter roads through snow and ice, all while maintaining combat effectiveness. Military movements of this scale typically required weeks of planning. Patton was promising days. Eisenhower pressed him. "Don't be fatuous, George. If you try to go that early, you won't have all 3 divisions ready and you'll go piecemeal." Patton didn't waver. He had already planned for this. His staff had prepared the contingencies. His divisions were ready to move. All he needed was the order. "I'll make a meeting engagement with the German forces," Patton replied. "The Kraut stuck his head in a meat grinder, and I've got the handle." Eisenhower gave the order. Patton left the conference and called his headquarters with a single code word: nickel. This code word activated one of the 3 contingency plans his staff had prepared. Within hours, the Third Army began its historic pivot. What followed was one of the most remarkable military movements in modern history. Over 100,000 men, with their tanks, artillery, trucks, and supplies, disengaged from combat and wheeled north. They moved through freezing rain, sleet, and snow. They traveled on icy roads in darkness, maintaining blackout conditions. They covered distances that military planners would have considered impossible under such conditions. The 4th Armored Division led the advance toward Bastogne. Behind them came the 26th and 80th Infantry Divisions. More units followed as quickly as they could be disengaged and redirected. On December 26, 1944, tanks from the 4th Armored Division's 37th Tank Battalion broke through to Bastogne. The siege was lifted. The 101st Airborne and the other defenders had held, but relief had come just in time. The breakthrough wasn't the end of the Battle of the Bulge. Hard fighting would continue for weeks. But the relief of Bastogne marked the turning point. The German offensive had lost its momentum. The encirclement they desperately needed had failed. From that point forward, it was only a matter of time before the Bulge was eliminated entirely. Patton's impossible promise had become military reality. The pivot of the Third Army remains studied in military academies worldwide as an example of operational excellence. But it wasn't magic, and it wasn't luck. It was the result of preparation, contingency planning, and a command philosophy that valued flexibility and initiative. There's a famous, possibly apocryphal story about Patton and the weather during this period. Frustrated by the fog and snow that grounded Allied aircraft, Patton allegedly ordered his chaplain to write a prayer for good weather. When the weather cleared and allowed air support, Patton awarded the chaplain a Bronze Star. Whether or not the story is entirely accurate, it captures something essential about Patton's character. He used every tool at his disposal, conventional and unconventional, to achieve victory. He believed in his mission, his men, and himself with an intensity that could be off-putting but was undeniably effective. The German commanders certainly noticed. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, who commanded the German offensive, later identified Patton as the most dangerous Allied general. The speed and violence of the Third Army's response disrupted German timetables and forced them to divert forces they couldn't spare. Patton had transformed an Allied disaster into a German defeat. So why was Patton the only general ready for the Battle of the Bulge? It wasn't because he was smarter than his peers. The Allied command included brilliant military minds like Eisenhower, Bradley, and Montgomery. It wasn't because he had better intelligence. If anything, he had the same incomplete picture as everyone else. Perhaps even less, since the Ardennes wasn't his sector. Patton was ready because he thought differently. He refused to assume the enemy would cooperate with Allied plans. He studied German capabilities and intentions, even when focused on his own offensive operations. He demanded contingency planning from his staff when other generals considered such exercises unnecessary. He built an army culture that valued speed, initiative, and flexibility above all else. The Battle of the Bulge revealed the consequences of complacency and the value of preparation. Allied intelligence had failed. Allied commanders had been surprised. But one general had done his homework, prepared his forces, and positioned his army to respond. When the crisis came, Patton didn't need to improvise. He needed only to execute plans he had already made. The Third Army's pivot remains one of the great achievements of American military history. Over 100,000 men turned 90 degrees in the depths of winter and attacked with full combat power in less than 48 hours. No other force in World War II accomplished a comparable feat. George Patton died in December 1945, just months after the war ended, from injuries suffered in a car accident. He never wrote his own account of the Battle of the Bulge, but his actions spoke louder than any memoir could. He saw what others missed. He prepared when others rested. He acted when others hesitated. That is why Patton was the only general ready for the Battle of the Bulge. If you found this story of leadership and preparation as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our future deep dives into military history. What do you think made Patton different from other commanders? Was it his personality, his training, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love discussing history with this community. If you want to learn more about World War II's turning points, check out the video appearing on your screen right now. And as always, thank you for watching. Until next time.